Hey everyone, and welcome to another lecture. In this lecture, we're going to be talking about the most common tools you'll be using while working in templates. And the tools I'll be talking about are the tools on the side over here, not so much any of the options or tools up here. So just the most common ones that you'll be using while you're editing or mocking up these templates. So the first and most common tool you'll be using is the move tool. The move tool is very simple. You can click and move things. It's pretty much what it's for. Very simple to use, very easy to use. Probably the number one tool you'll be using when you start editing templates. So like I said, you can click and drag, and it's more for just placing things on the canvas. And I'll talk about more about the move tool in the next section because there's a little tricks of the trade using it, little shortcuts and secrets that will save you a lot of time. Another tool you'll be using is the marquee tool. Most likely you'll be using the rectangular and the rectangular one and the ellipse tool, or I like to say the circle tool. I don't really pay attention to these last two, so just ignore those for the time being. The marquee tool for this, the rectangular version, it's basically what the title is. You can make a selection of a rectangle. Now you can do this for many different purposes. You can fill a color, let's say. So currently this is a shape, but if I had a new layer and I wanted to fill this, let's say, with black, I would fill that. And there we go, it's filled with black. So, you can use it for that purpose. You could also use it for the purpose of selecting a specific section and then copying and pasting it, potentially. Because I'm on a shape layer, it won't work. But I can, let's see if I could do this. Let's see. Going to just do something right quick. There we go. And if I copy that, there we go. So then I can use it to make copying a particular portion of my canvas or layer that I'm on. So you can use it for many different things. So that's one tool you'll be using a lot. Unfortunately, you will not be using the lasso tool, so we will not be talking about that. You won't be using the quick selection tool, so we won't be talking about that. You will, however, be using the excuse me, the crop tool. This tool I only use when I need to extend my canvas. So if I'm designing stuff for websites, I just use it to pull the bottom down because those very long web pages could potentially get longer in case you have more content. So if that's the case, I just take it and drag it down, and then when I'm happy with the length, I'll just move my footer down to that particular place. So we'll save that. So that's one tool you'll use a lot. Another tool you'll use is the eyedropper tool. This tool allows you to select different colors on the canvas. So I can pick the color I need, and it will show up here. So if I select that color, I'm not sure why it's changing to gray, but it selected it, and then I can find the color code right there. So that is another thing you can do regarding a tool you can use. It's very helpful if you need to continue to use a color throughout your canvas. You'd use the color selector tool or the swatches tool, and you can take that, and I know you said I wouldn't show you this, but this is in relation. If you go to Windows and swatches, you'll see that the color you selected shows up here. If I select white, that shows up. If I go back to this teal, that'll show up. I can select one here. I can also add it to my color swatches, and there we go, it's added, it's locked in place. I can always go back to it and select it from my swatches panel if I wish. And make sure that you're on the foreground, and by doing that you hit the X key on your keyboard. As you can see, I'm going between the two, so background and foreground. So right now I'm in the foreground, being in the teal, and now I'm in the background with the blue being in the foreground, and that's by hitting the X key. The next tool you'll probably use is, you wouldn't use a paintbrush, but you'll definitely use the gradient tool at some point. As you can see here in this template, they did use a gradient from going left to right, with there being a lighter color to a darker color, just to give some effect for this overall image. Now in the end, I could even just take this shape that was created and put an image into it if I wish, but for the purpose of this template, it looks like they want to just focus on the color. So that's another thing you can use by a tool that you'll be using. In order to open the gradient panel, you have to go up here and click on the gradient, and this box will appear. Then you can go ahead and click on this bottom little box, and you'll have the color selector appear. And you can select your color that way. You could also do the other color by selecting the other bottom one. Or you can just select a different gradient entirely and edit those if you wish. So if I wanted this to be blue instead, I can select the blue, and if I wanted this to be a lighter blue, I can select that, and then I can drag this gradient dot back and forth just to show how much blue I want to bleed into the other blue, and so on and so forth. How much do I want it to blend? So that's how you use that box. The next tool you'll obviously use a lot is the text tool or the typing tool. This tool you'll be using to make buttons, write out content, put titles, whatever your client needs, you'll be using that tool a lot. And last but not least, another major tool you'll be using is the shape tool. I know I just skipped over this text tool really quickly, but it's very straightforward. As I said, you'll just use it for text. So next is the shape tool, and as you can see here, the shape that we are on is dictating the top, which is the header, and you'll definitely be using this a lot. So if I click and I drag, I can make a shape. Now what is the difference between this and the marquee tool? Well, glad you asked. Not that you didn't, but just so you don't get confused, a shape tool or a shape layer is very, I shouldn't say very, but it's a smart object, meaning that you can edit it without it being destructive. I can transform it. It's not going to hurt it. I mean, obviously its size will change, whereas the marquee tool, I'll have to create a new layer, I'll have to select this, I'll have to make a box, I'll have to go to my gradient layer, I'll have to actually draw a gradient for it to do what I want it to do. Whereas if you see, if I delete this really quick, if I draw a box, I can go into the box and select a gradient in here without doing anything, and then edit it from that point on. You can change its colors, to changing its blend, to changing the direction that it flows, and changing its scale. So there's a lot I can do within the shape layer without affecting it, and it's a really great tool to use. I'll go more into this in detail later on, but I just wanted to just give you a brief overview of the toolbar on the left hand side. So the top tools we'll be using are the move tool, the marquee tool, the crop tool, the gradient tool, the text tool, and the shape tool. I have used the other tools in the past. I forgot the dropper tool, but you don't really need to use them. You don't need to use the dodge and burn tool. You don't need to use the smudge tool. You really don't need to use the eraser tool because everything we're doing is non-destructive, and all the other tools you really wouldn't use. The only thing I would say that you would use that I didn't point out is the zoom tool, but I think zooming and zooming out is very fluid, and I don't really count that as a tool. Because I'm on a laptop, I'm just pinching my fingers in and out to zoom in and then zoom out. So for me, it's just part of my flow as a natural thing, so I'm not really counting that as a tool. But if you want to, definitely as another tool, the zoom tool. And then we have a little hand tool here. This grabs your canvas and moves it around. I don't really necessarily use that. And when I say that, I mean I don't go down here and click it. There's a shortcut for it. The shortcut is the space bar, and then I do that to move wherever I need to. So if I'm zoomed in and I need to move up, I grab it by hitting the space bar, and then I can move and see what I need to see. Or I can get rid of everything by hitting the tab key, and that will show me my entire canvas, and then I can click and drag around while holding the space bar. And that is another tool I use, but like I said, that's more part of my workflow. It's more fluid, it's more secondhand nature for me, so I don't really count it as a tool. But if you want to count it as a tool, those are the last two tools to use when you're making these templates. I would say the top three, though, if I had to give you the top three: the move tool, definitely, so you can select points in the canvas; the text tool, and if you want to say this is a tool, then the move tool. And that's pretty much it. Those are the top tools you'll be using while making templates or working in them, I should say. Very, very easy to use, very straightforward. You don't need to be scared. Very simple. I highly recommend just going around and playing with it. Download a template, try to get a free one, and then go ahead and use the tools and start playing around. And before you do that, make sure you do that at the end of this section, because I'm going to be talking about other tools as well. That way you can have a general idea of, oh, okay, he's talking about this in depth or this in depth. I'm going to try that. This is a general overview of just the tools. I'll be getting more in detail with some of them, not all of them, but some of them. All right, so I'll see you guys in the next lecture. See you guys there.